again, thank you all for joining us, and now I'd like to thank everybody who is joining us on YouTube, watching the YouTube videos. We really are delighted that you watch our videos, lovingly prepared by Reverend Kelly Halleck, and we invite you to watch all the videos. In fact, that's another way you can come to the Sunday gathering just by watching the videos, so that's great. And I'm very happy to be here today and happy to be speaking about Martin Luther King. I was guided to spend a little time today thinking about Martin Luther King. Monday was Martin Luther King Day, and there was a lot of wonderful stuff on Facebook about Martin Luther King. Got me thinking about Martin Luther King. A number of years ago when Reverend Deuce Althea and I were traveling, went to Atlanta. We went to the Martin Luther King Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. It was really inspiring. I remember just how moved I was. I didn't expect to really be moved by that museum, but I was. And I bought this little book there, The Words of Martin Luther King, Jr., written and compiled by his wife, Coretta Scott King.
Wow.
And a lot of the quotations from Martin Luther King that I'm going to use today come from this book. And I have been challenged about the spelling of the word dikes, D-Y-K-E-S, and people say that's really not how you spell dikes if you mean the embankment to stop water. It should be D-I-K-E-S, except that I take the spelling that is in this book by Coretta Scott King, and if it was good enough for Coretta Scott King, it's the way I want to spell it, because that's, and if you look it up, that's an older way to spell the embankment of water. That hold, or the embankment of dirt that holds back the water. Okay, Martin Luther King said, "I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. I believe that what self-centered men have torn down, other-centered men can build up." So Martin Luther King was talking about having a world that worked for everybody, having a world where there wasn't hunger, having a world where there was always a home and clothes and education and things that would stimulate the mind and stimulate people to be really all that they could be, all that they were destined to be. And it's really a lot of what I believe A Course in Miracles is teaching us about the real world. That's what we're all here to manifest. We're all here to manifest this world that works for everybody, that doesn't have these appearances of lack, even sickness and disease in it. It even takes Martin Luther King's statement and carries it just a little bit further. But I have the audacity, I think we all have the audacity to declare that that's what we're about. We are about manifesting that kind of world. And I love what he says here, that I believe what self-centered men and women have torn down, people are just too focused on themselves, that other-centered men or women can build up. So we are all those other-centered people. We don't center our existence, when we're Course in Miracles students, just on ourselves. We center our existence and our energy on other people, on relationships, on other people who may appear to be in need or in lack temporarily. We give what we can give. We do what we can do to help other people, and that is what Martin Luther King was about, and I think that's what Course in Miracles is about, and that's what A Course in Miracles students are about. So I think we've got a lot to identify with and connect with about Martin Luther King and who he was. Just a little history on Martin Luther King. I'm sure everybody knows who Martin Luther King was and is. He was born 1929. He was assassinated in 1968. He was 39 years old. He didn't make his 40th birthday. He did all of that amazing work that he did from his late 20s in his 30s. He was a Baptist minister. He resisted going into the ministry for a while. His father had been a minister. His father was Martin Luther King Sr. He was Martin Luther King Jr. And he, didn't really know how he felt about the whole faith thing, and he thought there were a lot of problems with the teachings of the Baptist church, but then he just realized at a certain age that there was just more good in it than there was bad in it, And so he surrendered into his destiny. And I think we could all think about that. People have a lot of issues about church and religion. And, you know, it comes a point where you just realize, yeah, maybe there's more good in it than bad in it. And we can just surrender into it and just focus in on the good. I mean, we should be doing that with everything. We should be focusing in on the good. His first big civil rights thing that brought him into national attention was that he led the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. And that was the boycott when Rosa Parks was asked to give up her seat. Now, a little background here. Rosa Parks was sitting in the colored section, but just the first row in back of, you know, there's the white section, then she was sitting in the first row where the coloreds were supposed to sit. But apparently the white section filled up, and it was the habit that when the white section filled up, then the African American, the black people, were supposed to get up and let go of their seats. And she was a seamstress and had had a hard day at work, and I think as Barack Obama once said, she was just tired. I'm not giving up my seat. She said, I'm in the right section here, I'm not giving up my seat. And she was arrested. And they had been having other issues around the whole bus thing, and so they were waiting for just the right case to take all the way, and this was just the right case. And Martin Luther King was really prominent in organizing the African Americans and the colored people boycotted the whole bus system in Montgomery, and they carpooled and they did all kinds of things. They just basically didn't use the buses and was running the public transportation system broke and bankrupt. And the bus boycott lasted about a year. But then eventually it was overturned. There was a Supreme Court ruling that you couldn't segregate the buses, and that was his first big civil rights victory. It was great. He organized the Big March on Washington in 1963, and the Big March on Washington is when he said, when he gave the I Have a Dream speech, which is probably his most famous speech. I just got one line from it. He goes, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So he went on and talked about all the other things that he was dreaming of, about his children being able to, you know, be with white children and everybody being equal and all of those great things. It's a great speech. It's very inspiring. And he did that in 1963 on the National Mall. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. In 1965, he organized the Selma to Montgomery marches. There was a movie, Selma, just a couple of years ago that has the whole story of that. So he was already a prominent, you know, leader at that time, and his presence there, just going in there and then working with those people. You know, he'd already won the Nobel Peace Prize at that point. Really just galvanized things. As I said, just a few years later, he was assassinated. And he was assassinated the day after he delivered another really famous speech of his, which is the I Have Been to the Mountaintop speech, which was in many ways really prophetic about the fact that he wasn't going to be here much longer. And it was the very next day that he was assassinated. In 1971, people started celebrating Martin Luther King Day around the country, but it wasn't until 1986 that President Ronald Reagan declared it a federal national holiday. So now we have Martin Luther King Day as a federal national holiday. Okay, another wonderful quotation from Martin Luther King. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment. Life's persistent and urgent question is, what am I doing for others? And that's just amazing. And you know, a lot of people say, you know, why do you study A Course in Miracles? And you know, people will sometimes like downplay it. You know, we don't want to offend people. Everybody's like too concerned about offending people, and we make it all about ourselves. I study A Course in Miracles for inner peace. I'm not studying it to change anybody or anything. I'm just studying it for my own sense of inner peace. I study A Course in Miracles to be a miracle worker so that I can offer miracles to all my brothers and sisters everywhere. Woo-hoo! I study A Course in Miracles so I can be a healer and organize the healing team and offer miracles of healing to anybody who asks us for help because they're going through something. I study A Course in Miracles, and I charge everybody who studies A Course in Miracles to, yes, of course you're doing it for yourself, but there is no difference between yourself and the other, and so you're doing it for others as well. And sometimes the activity of it is directed towards others. Miracles are interpersonal expressions of love. That is the most common definition of miracles in the book. It's not miracles of shift perception. That's all about your own self and stuff, and a lot of people say that's actually not in the book. But what is in the book, in the 50 Miracles Principles a lot, and other places, is that miracles are interpersonal expressions of love. So it's really what we are doing for others, and that's that persistent and urgent question that Martin Luther King was asking us to ask ourselves, because we're here to be creatively altruistic and not destructively selfish, because that's actually darkness. If we're only studying A Course in Miracles for ourselves, it's darkness. It's destructive. It isn't what it was intended to be. And I think in this energy of Martin Luther King, we can all embrace that. And our brothers and sisters and ourselves frequently, sometimes, we go through things that are difficult. We go through things that are challenging, and I don't think A Course in Miracles wants us to pretend that those things don't exist. What A Course in Miracles is trying to give us is a technology so that when those things happen, we have a way of dealing with it, handling it, and we have the guidance then to turn it all around, to have a miracle in our lives. A Course in Miracles is not about pretending that negative things don't appear to happen. A Course in Miracles says, this is from the psychotherapy pamphlet, which doesn't get quoted a lot, sickness and death and misery, Reverend Peter read this, now stalk the world in unrelenting waves, sometimes together and sometimes in grim succession. Yet all these things, however real they seem, are but illusions. So sickness and death and misery, they stalk this world, and they sometimes come in unrelenting waves, like in rapid succession. I know everybody has had this experience. Like, life seems to be going along pretty good, and all of a sudden, wham, you get hit. And, wow, that was awful. Wham, you get hit. It's like, whoa! What the hell's going on here? That's what always reminds me when I read that passage. Unrelenting waves. And that's why we study A Course in Miracles, to have a technology, to have help, and to have a fellowship and a community of other miracle workers to help us stay focused on the truth and to rally. And I think it does take being bold. It does take being audacious, as Martin Luther. We have to have the audacity. We have to be audacious. We have to have the boldness and the pride to stand up for what this discipline is about, which is about being a miracle worker. Not just about shifting our minds. Yeah, that entails shifting our minds, but it's so much more than that. It's so much bigger than that. But we're nervous about stating that. What will people think? They will think I found religion. Oh, that's not so good. And they will think, what will they think? They'll think I'm wacky, and they won't want to be my friends. But we need to be audacious. We need to have that audacity. Martin Luther King said, many people fear nothing more terrible than to take a position which stands out sharply and clearly against the prevailing opinion. The tendency of most is to adopt a view that is so ambiguous that it will include everything, and so popular that it will include everybody. Not a few men who cherish lofty and noble ideas hide them under a bushel of fear, afraid of being called different. So he's telling us here that we do have to take these strong positions, and we will stand out maybe sharply and clearly against the prevailing opinion. The prevailing opinion of the world is that sickness and death are inevitable, that lack is really, the truth, and we have all these limitations, and relationships are scarce and hard and a lot of work, hard to come by, a lot of work, and all of these, all of these ideas, and we are here to audaciously stand for something else and stand up sharply and clearly against that prevailing opinion. It is the prevailing opinion, but we have to stand clearly and sharply against it and not be afraid of being called different. We're going to be called different. Oh well. Oh well. I would rather be called different and have a thought system and a philosophy and a spirituality that gives me a way to stand against those unrelenting waves of sickness, death, and despair. And what we also have when we study A Course in Miracles, and what we see and feel here today, are these people that are wonderful to study with. I know many of you here who have been involved with Community Miracle Center for some time, we know that one of the greatest things about our fellowship are the friendships and the relationships that we have. And A Course in Miracles calls all of these things and these relationships with others mighty companions. When we study this, one of the stages that we go through is developing these mighty companions. So the teacher of God needs this period of respite. He has not yet come as far as he thinks, yet when he is ready to go on, he goes with mighty companions besides him. Now he rests a while and gathers them before going on. He will not go on from here alone. So that's what we do with A Course in Miracles, and that's what we do at Community Miracle Center, and that's what we're doing right here this Sunday, and that's what we do in all the groups that we go to, but certainly it's what we do here. I know it's my experience. It's a lot of people's experience. We are gathering those mighty companions because those mighty companions are going to be what will enable us to have that Dyke of courage that Martin Luther King talks about, so that we can stand up against that flood of fear. This is the quote where that comes from. It says, "Courageous men never lose the zest for living, even though their life situation is zestless. Cowardly men, overwhelmed by the uncertainties of life, lose the will to live. We must constantly build dikes of courage to hold back the flood of fear." We must constantly build dikes of courage to hold back the flood of fear. And I think that's right in line with A Course in Miracles. I think that's right in line of what we do when we are studying things like this, what we do here at Community Miracle Center. We are building those relationships so that we can come up against and have that embankment to hold up when the flood of fear comes. I mean, actually, if you look at the picture that Reverend Kelly, great picture on the front page of your cover, that's Martin Luther King, standing arm in arm with his mighty companions on a march. Because they were, I'm sure, at that moment, a dike of courage against the flood of fear that was going to come their way. And, their response was all nonviolence. It was all the Mahatma Gandhi thing that he was so inspired to. He wasn't going to fight back, but he was going to stand up. He was going to stand up with his mighty companions against the flood of fear that was out there, that he knew was going to come. A Course in Miracles acknowledges that we're going to go through those periods of fear. It says, as the light comes nearer, you will rush to darkness, shrinking from the truth, sometimes retreating into lesser forms of fear, and sometimes to stark terror. So when we move towards the light, there is this resistance, and our ego manifests things, and our ego sometimes seems to get the best of us. And we sometimes shrink or just retreat to being protective and defensive to the lesser forms of fear. And sometimes it just washes over us and we're just scared shitless. And we're just terrified and floundering and just thinking we got to do and change everything. But if we've built those dikes of courage by joining with mighty companions, then we will have the strength to stand up against that. And that's why it is so damn important to connect with people, to connect with Course in Miracles people, spiritual people, healers, to connect with all your mighty companions here at Community Miracle Center. That's why I made such an effort to get so many people here today. I didn't realize I was going to be this successful. Because you are my mighty companions. And I have those unrelenting waves of fear. And when I do, you are my dike of courage. And you get me through that. And I am so grateful for you all. And you're all such a blessing in my life. And we all do that for each other. I thought I'd end with a little longer reading from Martin Luther King. And this is from the I've Been to the Mountaintop speech. Now you got to put it in context. He was going to get shot and killed the very next day. Now he didn't know that consciously, but a part of him must have. Okay. I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now. Because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. And I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Thank you for being here. Okay, amen. Okay.